Been looking at an article in the Times today, which is um, frankly frustrating and troubling. If that is, it's providing the whole context. Now, the Times is, I think, a pretty reputable source. It's not been in the industry for over 2 centuries for nothing. Um, so this is amidst the backdrop of a big security overview that the government's carrying out, supposedly the largest since the end of the Cold War, some 3 decades ago. So this is the article. I'm just going to read it out. It's a little bit lengthy, but I think it's important to read out the whole context. So please bear with me. Um, I have a lot of issues with this. So PM attacked for pushing trade links with China. Anger as Johnson says Cold War would be a mistake. The article is by Larissa Brown, who's a defense editor. Boris Johnson warned that a Cold War with China would be a mistake yesterday as he faced a backlash from his backbench MPs over plans to build deeper trade links with Beijing. The Prime Minister said that Britain had to strike a balance in its ties with China and that the government's integrated review offered a clear-sighted approach. Tory MPs and experts criticised the government for a grasping naivety and urged Johnson to take a tougher stance. It came as a leaked video emerged of Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, telling officials that Britain would seek trade deals with countries that violated international standards and human rights. Raab said in the call leaked to HuffPost UK that if Britain traded only with countries that met the European Convention on Human Rights standards, then it would miss out on growth markets of the future. A Foreign Office spokesman said that the audio had been deliberately and selectively clipped to distort his comments. As he made crystal clear in his full answer, the UK always stands up for and speaks out on human rights, the spokesman said. The 100-page review leaked to the Times on Monday said that China posed the biggest state-based threat to the UK's economic security and presented a systemic challenge to Britain's security, prosperity, and values. Other measures in the review include, and I'll just touch on these briefly, the reversal plan to reduce Britain's nuclear stockpile, so it's going to increase to 260 warheads. That will, of course, be controversial. A shift towards the Indo-Pacific countries, which are described as the world's growth engine, including the deployment of an aircraft carrier to the region. Well, I'd be supportive of that. To have more of a naval presence in that part of the world makes sense. The warning that it is likely a terrorist group will launch a successful chemical, biological, and nuclear attack by 2030, a pledge to increase foreign aid from 0.5% of national income to 0.7% when the fiscal situation allows, plans to make Britain a science and tech superpower by the end of the decade, a new counter-terrorism operations centre to improve the response to terrorist attacks, a counter-disinformation unit that will help to tackle false information from countries such as Russia. Totally support that. This is identified as the most acute threat to our security. Um, well, there's a solution to that. Ofcom can suspend the license of RT, long overdue. And I know that's not a government decision, but I think the government can definitely put pressure on Ofcom, and so can the public. I've tried to do my bit, and I won't be silent until that happens. It also said that Britain will need to pursue a positive economic relationship with China, including deeper trade links and more Chinese investment in the UK. This is a bit that really concerns me. Sir Alex Younger, former head of MI6, said the state represented a generational threat, and the idea that it would get richer and become more like the UK was clearly for the birds. Writing for the Times today, Younger said that the greatest problems the world faced could be impossible to just go forward. Would be impossible to solve without China. He said, though, that Britain should not dodge the fact that we are in fierce competition and in some cases a vital contest. He warned whoever loses will face reduced control over their own future. He suggested that China was exploiting the pandemic and its impact on international institutions. I think he's absolutely right. Younger said that the challenge would intensify until Britain could create credible consequences, that the review sought to address. In the comments yesterday, Johnson described China's treatment of the Uyghur minority in Xinjiang as mass detention. so he stopped short of the word genocide. He told MPs, those who call for a new Cold War on China or for us to sequester our economy entirely from China, which seems to be the new policy of the opposition, weaving as they generally do from one position to the next, yada, 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 are, I think, mistaken. No, Prime Minister, you're mistaken. Senior Tory MP said that Johnson must call out the threats posed by China and avoid the grasping naivety of the David Cameron years. Julian Lewis, chairman of the Intelligence and Security Committee, noted that the UK wanted deeper trade links with its adversary communist China, adding, doesn't that unfortunately demonstrate that the grasping naivety of the Cameron Osborne years still lingers on? Tobias Ellwood, the former minister, warned that there was a 1930s feel to the scale of challenges faced today, with rising authoritarian powers, weak global institutions, and an absence of Western leadership. I think he's onto something there. Michael Fallon, the former defence secretary, told Times Radio that Britain had to wear two hats in its dealings with Beijing, which included doing business with China and ensuring that it did not abuse the growing power that it held. We have to be on our guard, he said. And there's a whole spread there on uh, the nuclear issues and the other security issues. But this is the one I want to focus on. There's some things in this analysis, this review, that I welcome. Maritime presence in the Pacific, um, definitely the disinformation campaign against Russia. That's a very positive thing. That's something that we need to do. But like I said, Ofcom has a big part to play in that. RT has been churning out its lies and distortions and propaganda for years. Their response after Salisbury was to laugh at us. I think that is not only repugnant, but I think we need to stand up to them. But regarding China, I get the argument. I get the argument that we cannot only trade with countries that have decent human rights records and similar values to our own. I understand that. What I do not accept, and what I think the Prime Minister is dead wrong about, is this notion that if we take a tough stance, that's somehow starting a Cold War with China. If a Cold War has started, it is China that has started it with their belligerent behaviour, their lack of transparency, their aggressive wolf warrior diplomacy. These are all things that Johnson seems to be disregarding. I don't know what's going on in the corridors of power. It may well be that this is just diplomatic language and actually Boris Johnson is taking quite a tough stance. Um, but the fact that he's talking about mass detention rather than genocide, even though it bears all the hallmarks of genocide, says to me that he's trying to temper his language. That's the problem. I don't think now is the time to be overtly diplomatic with Beijing. I think we need to have tough rhetoric. I think we need to make them very aware of where we stand on this, that we're not going to just be a pushover. Um, Now, of the two men, I have to say, I think that Foreign Secretary is more likely to stand up to China. I say that simply because he has more of a track record of speaking out against Beijing than the Prime Minister does. And there's an irony in this, because Johnson has always modelled himself on this sort of great Churchillian patriotic figure. He's a subscriber to the great men of history worldview. That is, that influential men shape the course of history. But if he goes down as a prime minister who bends over backwards for Beijing, that's not a position of strength. That's not something to admire. It's certainly not in our national interests, and it is extremely naive. Now, to be fair, Johnson isn't the first prime minister to do this. It's been going on, I would say, at least since the Blair years. The reason I don't include Thatcher and Major is because they at least had sanctions on Beijing after Tiananmen Square. But, for a long time now, for decades, not just the UK, but the West in general, has taken this view: if we only give Beijing what it wants, if we kind of have closer economic ties to them, the Chinese economy grows, oh well, they'll reform and they'll change their ways. They won't. They won't. Why would they? Um, it's China's run by a communist party. Communist parties generally do not change. It's just not in their nature. So I really think that it's infuriating how, on the surface, how naive the Prime Minister is being about this. Um, why not say we need trade with China, but I am not going to shy away from criticising them? Why is Johnson so reluctant to speak out against China. Why? So I really hope these backbench MPs continue to put up the pressure. I hope the opposition puts up the pressure. Starmer needs to be speaking out. He needs to be calling out the Prime Minister on this, really saying why, frankly, is Johnson appeasing China? Because right now that's what it feels like. And I've made my views clear. I think, I'm just a citizen. I'm not a member of the security services. I don't have that sort of data. But my gut feeling is we cannot trust Beijing. And I think there's abundant evidence to show how they have tried to undermine Western democracy, how they've issued threats. Bear in mind, this comes in the same week that our ambassador to Beijing was given a dressing down. She had to go through that sort of public rebuke, all because she stood up for the importance of press freedom. So, where's Johnson's defense of her? Where's Dominic Raab's defense of her? I'm very frustrated with the signs that are coming through here. And there's also information that the new Chinese embassy, it's been warned it could be a nest of spies. It's going to be on the old headquarters of the Royal Mint. Um, this idea that we have to rely on China, that we have to give them what they want, that we have to tone down criticism, frankly, it's gutless. And I don't like criticizing the Prime Minister. He's obviously in an extremely demanding job. But I just think that this is very, very, very misguided. To put the focus on, oh, we better not upset them. We better focus on trade. I get it, trade is important, especially in a post-Brexit world. But I just think that this stinks of the sort of naivety that previous administrations were showing with Beijing. And Johnson, in a way, has less excuses because there's even more information now damning Beijing's track record. And if you think, okay, well, their human rights record is their internal issues, consider the very real threat that they pose to us in terms of undermining our institutions. There's credible evidence, for example, that they use bodies like Confucius Institutes in our universities as kind of fifth columns. It's no secret that Beijing has always tried to stir up the diaspora with nationalistic sentiment. For a long time now, I've taken the view that if Chinese nationals come here, we should welcome them. If they're tourists, if they're students, they contribute to the economy. And in the case of students, they do pay a lot of money. So give them the education, give them the full experience, but they need to remember that they are ultimately guests. And if they come to Britain to bully peers who happen to be critical of the CCP, or they come here to wave around the flag and demand respect, I think we need to take a harder line with that. But it's not just the government. Ofcom finally done the right thing, revoking CGTN's license. They still haven't done it with RT. I don't know why. But it isn't just the government and Ofcom. There is also our institutions. Every university department that is bending over backwards to give China what it wants in return for Chinese investment. It's actually a very big problem because this is putting us in a position where we could be sort of diplomatically blackmailed, i.e., we get all this investment, so then we have to be careful with criticism because then the investment will be pulled. So the answer to that is not focus so much on China. Why not? Johnson's talking about looking to the Indo-Pacific region, India, Indonesia. There's a lot of countries we can look at. They might not have perfect human rights records either, but at least they won't pose the sort of security threat that China does. So I'm somewhere between feeling kind of despair, extremely frustrated by this information because I don't know what the Prime Minister's playing at. Like I say, maybe behind closed doors he is taking a tougher line, but I think, frankly, it's legitimate to be vocally, publicly taking a tough line on China. I don't think it's good enough to just say, "Oh, we'll bring up human rights issues behind closed doors." Johnson needs to show that he has the guts to stand up to Beijing. He is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And frankly, it's about time he started acting like it on issues like this. That's my take.